and welcome to another edition of In the Director's Chair. My name is Stacey Swickert, and I am currently the Education Chair for the Port Tobacco Players. Our goal with this series is to give you an inside look at some of the very gifted and talented directors from PTP, and hopefully remind you a little bit of some of the magic that a theater performance can provide. It is with great pride and pleasure that I am chatting with Mr. Bill Graves this evening, one of our talented directors, an actor, and in general, just one of my very favorite people. So sit back and enjoy In the Director's Chair. So, welcome. Thanks so much for being here this evening. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. In my intro, I said that you are one of my favorite people, and that is very true. Always have been.
Well, thank you very much.
Man. So let's get started. Can you tell me what the first production that you directed at PTP was?
It was a company back in 1980 something or other. A terrible production. Didn't have the slightest idea what I was doing. It's just something that a musical is just not something you just jump into, apparently, because I had some talented people, on stage for me, but I learned I learned that was probably not the best choice to start out with.
Do you prefer musicals to dramas or comedies?
No. I've not really had the opportunity to, that I can remember, the opportunity to direct a comedy. But I mean, some of the musicals were comedic, and some of the dramas had comedic scenes. But an actual comedy, I haven't. But I prefer dramas to musicals because I don't have any musical background. So I pretty much have to give, well, I assume it is in most productions, you give all of the music part over to the music director, all of the choreography over to the choreographer. And then, for me anyway, I'm in the position of sitting out there watching rehearsals and listening to rehearsals and saying, that doesn't sound right to me, but I have a slight idea how to fix it. And then you say to the choreographer, that didn't look right. What do you mean? I don't know, but it just, something wasn't right, as opposed to, and you can't, I would expect you couldn't ask the chorus members to say, what is the purpose of this dance and who wants what from whom in it? And, like you can a dramatic scene.
Right.
So it's, but I do enjoy musicals, and I have directed some after.
You directed Cabaret, right?
Yes, which is one of my favorite musicals, and I thought the cast did a pretty credible job with it, and I enjoyed working with them. So that makes a big difference. Having been there, done that.
Yep. I enjoyed it. I watched it. I thought it was great. Of all of the different productions that you've directed, is there one that stands out as maybe your favorite or that you would do again?
With PTP or generally?
Let's do anywhere.
Well, did two at the Black Box that I would like to put in a larger venue. One being art and one being, I'll never forget what's her name. Isn't that terrible? The senior moment. It just escaped me. I'll think of it in a moment, and at the inappropriate time, I'll throw it out there to you. God of Carnage.
Oh, yes.
Right, and they got very limited audiences, and I thought the cast did so well. I would really like to put that out in a larger venue and do it again.
That's one of the things about that Black Box is it's so intimate, and that's great. But you also don't get huge audiences down there.
Exactly, exactly. Um, and that's pretty much what happened with that. The audiences grew as we went along, but we ran out of time before they really got to, the numbers that we were hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a matter of making money. It was just a matter of wanting to share those particular shows with a lot of people. So.
Hmm. So, what kinds of things do you consider when you're picking a piece?
Well, it has to be some. First off, it's got to be a literate play. I look for something that's been well written, because you've got more to work with. Um, the author does a lot of the work for you in that respect. The other thing is, this is something that I think that whatever PTP, for instance, if it could reasonably be cast, within the talent pool. Is it something that I think that I can bring something to? Is it something that I think I understand? Rather than, oh, I like that play, I think I'll direct it, or I like to direct it, and then really have no idea what the substance of it is. Just
you want to understand it.
It's and I think probably most directors are that way. The first few, like Company and others, you say you want to direct this, and yes, without thinking, and then after a while, as you learn, you realize that it's unfair to the playwright, it's unfair to the cast, and most of all, it's unfair to the audience if you're not up to the task, to whatever degree.
So, can you walk me through your process? Like, what does your process look like?
Of course, it'll vary from time to time, but generally, after I'm told that I'm going to direct something, of course, study the script, go through it in my own mind, get as familiar with it as I possibly can. I will cheat a little bit and go look for reviews of other productions to find out what the reviewers didn't like, where they thought the problems were, and then I'd look and see if this is, of course, even before auditioning. I would look to see if there's maybe some way around that, some way to improve it. And then, of course, as someone, as a truly gifted director once said, and I can't cite him, unfortunately, you start with a vision and you end up with a compromise. So when the auditions happen, you got a cast of 8 and 6 people show up. And then what do you do? Well, then you go start beating the bushes and you find somebody that can fill those 2 slots. And now you're with a cast of 8 and you've got 8 people. And you can't afford to lose anybody. And so, but maybe you have an audition and a cast of 8 and 20 come out. Then you start thinking about, well, maybe should I double cast? Or, so the process changes depending on the circumstances. But generally, again, certainly get a grasp of the play. Then you find out who my cast is. And then I work pretty much like a painter would. The cast is my pigments and the play is the canvas, and we try to get them together as best we can, but it's not okay, this is definitely what we're going to do and this is how I'm going to do it, because for me it's never worked out that way. And I always hope for, expect, and in some cases, I can't say demand, but in some cases urge the cast members to participate in dialogue with me about the play. They have to understand where they're coming from, where their character is coming from. And I have to understand what they think where their character is coming from. And let's face it, I mean, I'm an amateur at this. Frequently, they are more right than I am. Sometimes I think I'm more right than they are, and then we have to come to that compromise. How are we going to change the situation so that we get more on track? Um, I encourage my cast not to read italics in a script, especially if the author or the italic, which is a stage manager's note from a earlier production, says he laughed or she cried or he cried or whatever. Because those things become forced if the actors, so we have to work through those things. And basically, then the process after that is then started weaving in the crafts, the set, the lighting, the costumes, and all that sort of stuff. And finally, it gets to some cohesive thing and fine tune.
That you read my mind. That's exactly what I was thinking, because I've worked with you a couple of times now, and that is exactly what the end is. It's fine tuning.
Yeah, and I'm sure most of them are that way. That most directors are that way. You get so far and you realize you can make changes, but you can't say, oh, you know what, this isn't working, and throw it out and start all over again. You got to somehow make it work.
Yeah, you're too far along.
Yeah.
So what would you consider your greatest challenge as a director?
My greatest challenge? Time control. When, again, in PTP, in January if you've got a show or not. Let's say you have the Christmas show. You've got 11 months before that sucker goes up, right? That 11 months can just evaporate like dew on the grass on a sunny morning. Everything starts out fine. The producer finds the crew, you get together, you have your production meetings, everything's on time. The set designer, comes up with the plans. The lighting designer looks at them and says, yeah, we can light this, we can light that, do this, that, and the other thing. The costumer does their thing. Next thing you know, it's auditions. And I think it's like 3 days later, it's opening night. I mean, the time just compresses and goes by so fast. I guess because we're all so busy. And it's my biggest challenge to try to control that somehow. And it's my biggest weakness because I don't do it very well. Much to the cast and other crafts dismay sometimes.
I do remember meeting and just being kind of a spectator in one of your production meetings for Christmas Carol several years back. And I remember thinking, but it's August. Plenty of time. And the next thing you know, that show was opening. I remember that.
Well, and you never know what's going to happen too with that. I can't remember what the production was. It was with PTP, and the producer tried for 3 months to get audition dates. It was like an October show, and we weren't auditioning until August or something. We just couldn't get an audition date, and it was crazy. But it happens. Stuff happens.
It does. So. It absolutely does. What do you think is the most valuable lesson that you've learned as a director?
Not to get too philosophical, but I don't know if this is the biggest lesson or the greatest, but I came to realize, probably not until I directed, that there are all sorts of different art forms, but theater, we talk about the different crafts. acting as a craft, directing as a craft, and stage managing as a craft, and lighting, all, and sound, and everything is all these crafts. It's not until they come together as some sort of cohesive unit that it becomes an art. And that might seem obvious, but it wasn't to me initially. And it's something that I learned, and I realized that if we're not on board together, then it just hurts the production. Not always successful with it in all ways, of course, but that's one of the valuable lessons. And the other, of course, is you learn back to company again. You learn your range. I am not going to direct Shakespeare ever. It is not within my range, and I won't attempt it. And there's no sense in trying to do it. It would be, nor would I probably want to direct a a Eugene O'Neill play, because I just don't think that I have the range to do that, at least not now. But going down the list a little bit, I would try Mamet. I would like to direct a couple of his plays, and so forth and so on.
It's funny that you say that, because as a young director, a first-time director with one act, you were one of my cast members, and it was O'Neill. And you did say to me, I'm not sure you knew what you were getting into.
Well,
and you were right. I was way over my head. And I remember you very carefully kind of walking me through it and asking me the questions that I needed to hear to be able to think about it on a deeper level. But had you not been part of my cast, and had you not been yourself, I don't know what would have happened with my little one act. That was you probably don't remember.
I don't know whether you noticed it. I don't know whether you noticed just then or not, but there was a huge freeze. You froze there for about 10 seconds.
Did I really?
Yes. Yeah. So I didn't catch exactly what you were saying.
So what I was saying was that my one act was O'Neill, and you were one of my cast members. And I absolutely remember you at one point looking at me and going, I don't know that you knew what you were getting into.
Yeah, well, so much stuff comes up when you're directing that that you may not be prepared to deal with. Personalities, all sorts of issues of that nature, talent issues, ego issues, yours as well as the cast members, and it takes.
Very fortunate, because you kind of sat me down and said, do you really understand what's going on in this? And you kind of walked me through it, and we spent some time talking about it. And thankfully, we were able to get through it. I will never attempt it again.
Well, that's unfortunate, because the one acts are a great place to start, and that's where I should have started. I did assistant direct a couple of shows, and I co-directed some, but one acts are very good. And one of the reasons and I would recommend anyone who wants to direct one acts if they can, is because they're so tight. There's no fluff. There's no the characters have to get right there and get and the dialogue is so precise, and so if it's a good one act and so accurate that it sort of helps you along. You might not hit the nail on the head the first time out, but the second time I bet you would.
Like I said, I was so grateful, because again, I was Eugene O'Neill, It was a drama. It was way deep. It was difficult. And I would think I was probably 18 maybe. And thankfully I had you. Laura was in it as well.
Yeah.
Laura two things, so she kind of sat down with me one night and we walked through. And I just feel very fortunate that I had good people around me. Otherwise, it would have been just a disaster. But you're right. Those different components have to play together. And I think that it's really interesting when you consider theater, writers write, and that's their craft and that's what they do. And musicians play, and they do that almost, you can do it in solitude. You can do it. It's a solitary thing. You can, it certainly in this, when you add it to a theater production, it becomes an entirely different art form. But without, all of those things are individual, but in the theater, without there, it doesn't exist individually. It has to be that communal experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even a one person show is a communal experience. You know? Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, again, the One Act is a good place, I think, to start. And there's so many good ones out there that no one's ever seen, because there's just books of them. Tennessee Williams, wrote 100 of them, but they're rarely produced, but they're all little gems. And, I guess that's what he did to fill in the time between great ideas. I don't know.
Well, Neil, that The Rope was that one act, and I don't remember. I have no idea where that came from or how I got my hands on it or why I thought it was definitely something that I was going to do. Probably in a discussion one night, probably sitting around at Casey's, it came up and I said, I'll do that.
Well,
I'm sure he's much more well-read than me came up with the idea.
I do think that one of the dangers for directors, myself included, I definitely include myself in that, is to see a play and say, oh, wow, I really like that. I think I'd direct it. When, because you liked it, it's because someone who knew what they were doing was directed it, and so you're thinking, oh, I think I'll direct that and expect it to come out the same way. It's very, very difficult to do. I've often said that directors are like doctors. If a doctor has a patient and the patient lives, the family says, oh, thank God. If the patient dies, they sue the doctor. Well, directors are like that, I think. If it's a good show, everyone will say, great cast. If it's a flop, they say, well, who directed that piece of garbage? So
That's true.
But you sort of have, that's just part of the game, in my opinion. But,
is there a director that has inspired you?
Back in the day, although I didn't actually work on stage for him, Joe Carvajal. He constantly put up excellent plays when he was on stage as well as when he directed. You could really tell that he knew what he was doing. I wish I had gotten or had the chance to work with him more, quite frankly. But yeah,
He was amazing.
He's one of, but there, he's passed away, unfortunately, and so I will mention him as opposed to some that might be still with us and leave some, might say one and leave another one out, and then I'm in trouble. So.
I can see that, and I did. Joe Carvajal was one in a million.
Yeah, and see, he apparently had that ability to handle egos, temperaments, problems, and time in a much better way than I can. And because he never seemed to get ruffled about anything.
But I was just thinking he was so even-keeled through every step of the way. That's what I remember the most about him. And why I gravitated towards working with him was because he was so even keeled all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And just a generous, kind of a generous person, like just a generous to his actors, generous to his staff, really handled himself
Right.
well. Yeah.
And you could, he wasn't a minimalist by any stretch of the imagination, but you could never go into a show and say, oh, Joe directed that. I can see that he directed that, because he never put his thumb on it. He just orchestrated it, and,
He
gave
let
it.
it speak for itself.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And nothing is worse for a play, I think, or a movie, is when the director decides to make it their own. Forget about what the author intended.
Right.
Forget about all that. This is what I'm going to do with it. And they're all, in my opinion, they're always terrible failures. So
So is there a show that you would love to direct?
I like the costume period pieces somewhat. I like to take a shot at Lion in Winter. Um, there's no venue around here, PTP being one of them, I think, that could do Beckett, but I'd like to. It's a long, long play, and I think it requires a horse on stage. So I don't think I'd do that. But yeah, I'd like to do Glengarry Glen Ross. Um, oh, there's any number that I think would be fun to do.
Mm.
Um, in this day and age, though, the older plays become, in some instances, become more difficult to do, because they for instance, they might have Agnes of God is a show I directed at the Black Box. I loved the play. I thought we did a very credible job with it, but smoking is integral to it. That play will never be done again, in my opinion, or I would imagine. Let's put it that way, because there is smoking all the way through it, and it's integral to the play.
Yeah.
So those things have to be looked at, and how can you overcome them, or can
Losing.
you cut them out? Rewrite. Who knows? For amateur productions, what you can get away with, and how you can handle those things.
Mhm. Yeah, especially in certain venues.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
I think too, some of those older shows, they don't have the notoriety anymore. They don't have the commercialism of some of the more current big Broadway production kind of things. And that's especially in a community theater. Sometimes it's hard to get the audience for those.
well, some of the older I would really love it if a group of really talented writers got together and went over some of these old chestnuts and brought them into the 21st century. Um, I think there was one on the reading list of the proposed plays for PTP a few seasons back, and I was looking over the list and see if there's anything I wanted to submit to direct. And one of them said, it rang a bell with me. I couldn't really remember it, and so I said, okay, I'll go get a copy of it and read it. The language in it was so antiquated that I thought, this is ridiculous. A modern audience they wouldn't sit there and moan and groan. They'd just get up and walk out. Not to mention whether a 21st century actor could get their head around it. And I'm not talking about classic literature. This is something that was written in the 30s. But it was, I can't remember the name of it, but an excellent play plot wise and interest wise. But it was so heavily worded and just antiquated.
Cumbersome almost.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
unfortunately, there's a lot of those out there that would be excellent if they were brought back, but who knows if they ever will, you know.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I appreciate your time tonight. I
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed talking with you.
I enjoyed it too. I don't get to do enough of that with you in COVID times.
There you go. There you go.
But I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Again, thank you.